Recording is on. And I'm going to come in.
This is Queer from the Other Side.
Your queer approach to everything from the paranormal and supernatural realms.
With no subject left unexplored.
I'm Shauna, your resident witch with a talent for hunting ghosts and connecting with Earth's energy.
I'm Alexander, your in-house skeptic, with my own ghost stories and obsession with outer space. But will I ever believe?
And I'm Derek, your on-air spiritualist on a mission to awaken souls to ground their spiritual power into their physical experience, bridging heaven and earth.
Get ready to explore.
Here we go.
The show starts now.
Hello and welcome back to Queer from the Other Side, where we talk all things paranormal, nothing left off the table. I'm Derek Jameson, your resident spiritualist.
I'm Shauna Leilani, your resident witch.
And I'm Alexander Rodriguez, and I am your in-house skeptic who wants to believe. I just have to say, our opening, it's like eerie, but it also sounds like the opening of Intervention. You know that show, right? I'm just like, I'm just waiting for that day.
It's a spiritual intervention. It's a galactic intervention.
There you go.
Well, let's see how this intervention is going to go today. We are talking all of my favorite things with a specialist today. We're talking all Egypt, mysticism, the real stuff, the truth, the conspiracy, all the magical things. I'm so excited. I've been to Egypt a few times. The third time I was supposed to go, it actually went downhill because I had COVID the day before I was supposed to leave.
Oh, no.
It's a whole thing. But I have a lot of history with Egypt and a lot of energy connection to ancient Egypt. So this is literally buzzing me up. I'm so excited. But first, before we get to talk to our Egyptologist today, we had a lot of weird spiritual stuff happening, all of us. So I think it's time to share a little bit of personal stories. But I know you had a story that you wanted to talk about, a night friend.
Well, so this has happened for the last 5 years, every 6 months, and it's like clockwork. And then it stopped for about a year, and it's back. And it's the same thing. I'm on my side, and I feel something just digging, feet digging into the small of my back, and it happens in my dream. And then I wake up, and it's happening in real life, and I'm frozen. I can't use my voice, and I am just frozen, and something is digging in my back. And then I finally, I try, and I'm I finally say, get out, and then it disappears. It's not a good energy, by the way. It's not it's somebody just saying hello. It's never been a good energy, and it's followed me house to house, and it actually followed me in a hotel in Palm Springs, and then the sheets actually flew up in the air.
Can I just say that I love that you're a skeptic?
I know, I was just
But you have your own, playing with the sleep paralysis statement, right?
No, but it happens. But here's the thing. It's then I was oh, that must have been a very vivid dream, but it is literally like clockwork, and I'm fully awake. I'm awake, because afterwards, it's not like I wake up again. I'm just awake, and I can never go back to sleep.
Is the dream
I feel
the same
it's so
dream,
real.
though?
No.
Okay.
No. I'll be, in the middle of a dream, and all of a sudden, I know that this is happening.
Okay.
And it's okay, open your eyes, because this is happening. It takes me out of whatever dream I'm in. And it's for real. It's not just oh, I felt like an ache in my back. Because I feel the weight of the bed next to me. I always sleep on my side. And then I just feel the pressure, and it's like somebody's digging their feet, or
something in there.
Yeah.
Well, I experience sleep paralysis all the time, and there's different things that happen during that period. But I'm sure you've had the experience of it.
Well, I'm fortunate enough to say that I got a pass on that, but my husband was not that lucky. So he's the one that's dealt with sleep paralysis and astral projection and all of that. My expertise is shutting that down. So if you need help, I have things that we can do to stop that.
I just don't know what the point of it is. What is it? And that it follows me. It's not like I was in a haunted place or something.
Did this start with that other one that pulled your hair? Remember we talked about that at the last episode?
That was years and years and years ago. This has just started happening in the last 5 years.
The skeptic with the haunted history.
I know.
I'm here for it.
But I still, and then the next day I'm always that was just another crazy dream. But it's real, because I know for a fact that it's real.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's crazy.
That's what I experience all the time, and that's why I tell people, no, I have sleep paralysis. I'm awake. And what's interesting about this is that I can see what the energies are in the room, where they're at in the room, and what's taking place. That happened to me this last week. And so I saw certain things coming in. It was almost like the astral plane bridges over into the physical, and I'm able to see it. So whereas you're I don't know what is doing that, I can actually see the things that are doing it. There's a that's where
I don't think I want to ever see, because it's like I said, it's not a friendly energy at all.
Well, you're going to talk to that one.
Yeah.
And
We
she'll
can
work
shut
with
that
you.
down.
But I keep waiting for it to progress, like for them to say, "I'm here for whatever," or take me
But
away or
maybe
whatever.
You
Just do
don't
something.
want it to, though. Like you probably don't want that to progress because obviously it's something not great. You're
It's
already
not
feeling
great.
it, so you don't
It
want
affects
that.
me for like 2 days after.
Yeah.
I just feel like, ugh.
So you don't want that to progress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
No.
remember that everything spiritual also has a physical point to it as well. So even though we're experiencing something where it's like there's a spiritual energy that's here, my body is paralyzed, I'm awake, but this is taking place. Remember that the brain and the body also have physical components that work with this. So when you wake up, but your neurology isn't fully online, you're going to be in a paralysis state. So some people that are very physically focused are just going to say it's a brain, body, mind. You're awake, but you're not fully there. As that is part truth, it is not all the truth, because during that place with that awareness, I still have these experiences too. So to be black and white with all of this is not looking at the whole picture. So it's cool to just have both awarenesses and how we can like work with that. But there's definitely energies there.
I just absolutely hate it because you try to like emote my voice and I'm making a gargling sound, but like it can't come out.
Yeah.
It just can't. And then all of
Sure.
a sudden I have to mentally be like, I'm stronger than whatever. And then it like in a snap, it's gone.
Yeah.
Absolutely gone.
Sure.
I would try and like keep track of the dreams that you have like before
Yeah.
that and see if there's any kind of connections because it also sounds like you're probably astral projecting. I'd like to know like where are you? What are you doing? Who are you?
Hey,
doing?
if I'm
What's
going on vacation, I'd like to remember it and I'd like to know.
Well, the thing is with this, so I had sleep paralysis this last week as well. It was right before I went to one of these writing sessions, and I freaked out. And it was in the middle of the day. I was laying there. The light is
In the middle of the day?
In the middle of the day.
No, ma'am.
So, well, this is the thing. So
thank
it's
you.
not always a negative experience. So because I was paralyzed, I started freaking out. But it's my fear projection about what's happening that's the issue. Because what I saw in the room were actually two women who were it was almost artistic looking, and they were dancing around and looking at me in the living room. And I was paralyzed and I could see them, didn't fully understand it. That night I went to these recording studios for the artists, and I stepped outside just to talk to the other songwriter, and I was like, hey, I'm just going to step out here. And I look at this big painting that's sitting outside of the recording the session studio. It was the same stylistic.
out.
I'm not kidding. And I like hit my friend. I was like, Jessica, this is exactly, because it's very stylistic. The brushes, I couldn't explain it, and I was freaking out.
That's a sign
Yet
that you were
it
doing
was
what
just-
you were
yes.
supposed to be doing.
Yes.
Artistically,
Yes.
creatively, you knew what was going to happen.
Yes. So it's not always a negative thing. Sometimes we're experiencing messages that want to come through. The worlds are bridging, and the more you expand your consciousness, the more that we're actually able to tap into other levels. But sometimes it's really negative.
Okay, so let me get this right. You get the hot body, you have the hot boyfriend, and now you have the positive frozen session, and I have none of that.
Well, we'll
Got it.
We'll change that for the future.
Got it.
All right.
Well, none of my experiences were as I don't know, like deep as either one of yours. I feel like I stayed on the earth plane in the sense that mine were all surrounded by ghosts. So I was just out of town. I did a little Pacific Northwest tour. It was really fun. And everything kind of happened in Washington. So first I got to do the Seattle Underground. That was my first time doing that tour. It was really cool. It was really fun. And I was like, oh, this is just like a kitschy thing, And then I was the last person on the tour, and I was putzing around doing something, not paying attention. Like, oh, I have to go catch up with everyone. And I had a backpack on, and something grabbed my backpack and pulled me back. And I was like, oh, I guess this isn't just a tourist trap. Okay.
Was Stephanie in your backpack?
She was at the hotel. She was probably like, hey, what are you doing?
Yeah,
My
you forgot
boyfriend's
me.
here. You didn't
Yeah.
take me. What's happening? So that happened. And it was just, usually when I have an experience with the spirit, I like having those moments where they touch me or do something because it lets me like it's real. It's like this is exciting for me. But what happened was like there was nothing after that. Usually the spirits will talk to you, get a sense of who it was. Are they angry, or was it like a hey, what about me? But it was just that pull. That was it. So that was a trip. And then I got to wrap my tour up in Port Townsend, Washington, which the town boasts for being a haunted town. It's this Victorian town. It's so cute. All the buildings are Victorian. There's like Not very much there. Like everything closes at like 5. Okay, the bars close at 8:30.
Oh, no, ma'am.
Wild and crazy.
That's enough to make me scared. Yeah, that makes me scared.
And I was in my friend has a candle shop there, so that's where I was doing all my classes. We did a seance there, talked to a lot of spirits in the building. Stephanie was there for that. She made a new friend, but like you're just walking down the street and you can just feel it all over you. Nobody talked to me as I was walking by. I didn't pick anything up, but you could just feel like, you need you really spiritual hygiene is needed if you live there. I don't know how people do it.
Yep. I walk by a lot of places like where I live. So I live in the mountain areas, but there's certain houses that when I walk by with my little beagle, I'm like, we got to stay away from that house. It's like just has a dark aura around it. So I get it. You just feel it. I can't even pick up on what information it is, but it's just like I just feel the energy.
That's the part that I don't like. When I can't pick up on the information, I'm like, that's weird. You're hiding something. That's what I don't like. Usually if something's dark and ominous, I run towards it. I'm like, oh, it's spooky. Let's go. But this town, I was like, I need a salt bath.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
There's that scary moment. It's like you want it to be creepy and you want to see a ghost, and then you're like, it's like a roller coaster. You're like, no, I'm never doing that again.
I am such a sissy. Like I want it. I want the ghost experience. I want to watch them throw something at the wall, but when it happens, I'm going to scream and I need to go hide behind somebody, but I still want it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. All right, you guys, let's get into it. My body is like shaking just so we can talk to our amazing hot Egyptologist. He's here. He's moving, so he's tapping in to talk to us. I'm gonna go over his information real quick. We have Nicholas Brown. He's an American Egyptologist who has worked as an archaeologist in Egypt since 2011. He received his master's degree in Egyptology from the American University in Cairo and his PhD degree from UCLA. Nick's research interests include the royal funerals from the New Kingdom. So we're thinking King Tut, Ramses the Great. Now, that's one of my favorite locations in Egypt is the Valley of the Kings. So, oh my gosh, I have chills all over my body. Nick has been featured on Netflix, the History Channel, Discovery Plus. I just saw his BuzzFeed video where he's talking about all the films and whether or not it's real, and that was so cute. I loved it, and so much more. Nick Brown, welcome to the show.
It's not applause. All the past Egyptian ancestors are all clamoring around.
How we doing out there?
Yeah, great. Thank you all so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here chatting with you. So, yeah.
We're so excited to have you. I know that you're moving, so thank you so much for getting us in here. You're moving because you got to go do your work somewhere, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I got a job actually over on the East Coast. So unfortunately, I'm leaving LA and heading to the East Coast for some work. But this is a very welcome break from the move and from all that chaos.
Absolutely, like a boss life. I mean, what can you do? You got to be a king. You got to be a King Tut, you know? Now, listen, we want to get into it right away. I need to know, one of my questions was, okay, I know about Hatshepsut, I know about some things in ancient Egypt, but you got to give everyone the tea on what it was like to be queer or gay or transy in ancient Egypt.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So, we don't have a lot of direct evidence for any kind of queer expressions or experiences for the ancient Egyptians in ancient Egypt. But kind of through secondary evidence, we can guess that, basically, I think queer people have been around since the beginning of time. I think it'd be really hard to argue against that. Yeah. And so we have certain characters from ancient Egypt who kind of give us hints of what that might have looked like or that might have been like. So I think Hatshepsut is kind of one of these more famous examples, like you just mentioned, where she was a female queen who actually became essentially king of Egypt. And in order to kind of fully embrace that position, she actually adopted male attributes in her kind of official propaganda and depictions. So she would often show herself in men's clothing, wearing a male kind of beard, facial hair, right? Her early statues, she's very much a female figure, but then later on she becomes or starts to depict herself looking more male. So this is one kind of example from ancient Egypt that we have of perhaps potentially queer expression or, sexual identity kind of expression, right? And then even, we have all these other pieces of evidence from daily life where, there's a lot of morals and values attached to I guess, more heteronormative kind of lifestyles, right? So, get married, have children, produce all these offspring. But there's never any direct kind of mention of kind of rules or regulations against having queer relationships either. And so some Egyptologists have suggested that perhaps that could be evidence as well that, so long as you were procreating and making kids, it was all right on the side to perhaps have a male or female lover, depending on your, desires, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
sexual orientation. So yeah.
with that, my secondary add-on question into that is a lot of people have ideas about the Middle East and being queer and going there. I've been to Egypt a few times. I've also been out to Morocco. I just have such an affinity to the Middle East. But a lot of people have fears and ideas about that. Now, you have lived in Egypt. Sure, I want to know what your experience is, and I think it's really helpful to people to hear from a queer person and whatever level that is that goes to Egypt or goes to these Middle Eastern countries, because we need to dispel some of that idea that people have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question as well. And so as you were hinting at, Derek, I actually have lived on and off in the Middle East and in Egypt specifically for over 7 years now, and have been a queer man the whole time while I've been living there. I would argue it's very much a safe place for people of queer identity to be able to go and visit. I've even taken my partner over there several times. I think he and I have done about 5 trips together now over to Egypt. There definitely in Egypt is a queer scene. Again, they exist. I think anywhere in the world you go, you're going to find someone who identifies as queer. And, my personal experience, or my personal maybe kind of mantra while I'm over there, if you will, is, I'm visiting Egypt, right? So I'm a guest in their country. I'm a visitor. So with that, I think there are some kind of rules or kind of respectful customs to follow, if you will. So even though I travel there with my partner, even though I myself identify as a queer man, I'm not necessarily flashing that in people's faces. I'm not, really doing PDA. I'm pretty selective with who I talk about it with over there. It may be a bit complicated for me in particular because obviously I'm going for my own work and my research, right? So I've got a different agenda over there. But I know lots of queer men and women who have been able to travel to Egypt who have been very safe going there as well. Again, I think it's a balance of, being proud of who you are and trying to feel comfortable wherever you travel, but also at the same time, perhaps being a bit respectful or just cognizant and aware of the locals' kind of customs and lifestyles and rules, perhaps. So
absolutely. Well, thank you, because I think that honestly, that was a big question, because I think people need to understand that it's not what is portrayed always, and that I felt very safe there too.
But there are cases of police entrapment on Grindr.
Sure.
There's that case in Iran where they had that guy in jail for how many months? They wouldn't give him his HIV meds.
Yeah.
And they trapped him on Grindr for that. So, I think it's mostly being aware. Because I want to know, you deal with other Egyptologists, and you talk to researchers, you talk to Egyptian people that live there and live the culture. Has your sexuality ever been an obstacle in terms of progressing in the research and in your career?
Yeah, no, another, I think, great question. I, knock on wood, I have not experienced kind of any anything like that, in terms of my own sexual orientation and being able to work and live in Egypt, essentially, which I'm very fortunate that I haven't had any kind of experiences like that. I think you're absolutely right to point out that, applications like Grindr, right? Those are used, unfortunately, by Secret Service police to kind of entrap queer men, in particular in Egypt. And what I always advise friends and people who go over to the Middle East and to Egypt in particular is, you just have to be head smart about, your interactions on Grindr or Tinder or kind of any other dating application where, if the conversation seems sketch, if they're wanting to meet up in weird places, if something just feels off, right, your kind of gut feeling, then I wouldn't go. Stop chatting with them, block them, don't meet up. I always advise meet up in public if you are going to use those over in the Middle East, and then, try to meet up with a local or somebody from the area. And we have the same kind of experiences here in the States, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where you're chatting with someone online and it's not sitting well, or there's something off about the conversation. So, whether you're here in the States or you're off over in the Middle East, just be smart about it. So
Amazing. Now, I know you had some questions on your end.
I do have some questions for you. So I'm very involved in the Los Angeles pagan community, and it's a very eclectic group. We have people from all different lineage backgrounds, both just like from their own relatives and heritage, as well as the traditions and backgrounds that they work with as far as pantheons. I personally do not work very heavily with the Egyptian pantheon. However, I actually have a lot of coven members that do, and a lot of friends, and I've noticed that it's something so prominent that people are so deeply called to. I've been to rituals that are led by people that are priests and priestesses of these kinds of traditions. And what I always notice is that a lot of times within witchcraft, we are drawn to certain pantheons because there's something about it that aligns with our spirit. That's how this works. For me personally, I am drawn to Strega, which is Italian witchcraft, which makes sense. I have Italian heritage. I have a lot of friends that have no ties to Egypt as far as their heritage goes at all, but they're so deeply called to this. And I wanted to get your opinion on where that might come from. My personal theory is that maybe it has to do with like trades, that like the trade routes that have been taken historically, where maybe the cultures have intermingled, and that's where it may be tied in from an ancestral level. But I kind of wanted to get your take on that and how you feel about Egyptian mythology and mysticism being so popular here in Western society.
Yeah, no, I think that, it's a really, interesting question to pose. And, the thing with the ancient Egyptian kind of spirituality or religious beliefs is it's just such a fascinating kind of pantheon, right? As you're mentioning. And particularly just the different types of gods and goddesses that exist within their religious sphere. And, the Egyptians, they were so good at being observers of the natural world, right? And their gods and goddesses kind of reflect that. So each kind of deity within their religious sphere kind of reflects one of those attributes, right? So there's a god like of the Nile River, for instance. There's a god of the air, of the sky, of the moon, the sun, and all these different kind of natural elements as well. And so I mention all of that because I'm not sure if perhaps for us as Westerners, right, if there's not only this kind of fascination with kind of ancient Egyptian religion, but also perhaps maybe a relatability to it in a way. That there are concepts that we can easily understand, right? Like the sun, the moon, for example. So that potentially could be one avenue or one explanation, let's say, of why people find it so relatable and so are drawn to Egyptian religion and studying that. And I think even this isn't this isn't a recent trend or a more modern trend, but even in antiquity and ancient times, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, they were like super fascinated with ancient Egyptian religion, and they had these kind of polytheistic, religious beliefs as well. And so they actually started adapting ancient Egyptian gods into their own religious beliefs. So I know one of the famous examples is the goddess Isis. She actually had temples dedicated to her in Italy for the ancient Romans, for example. So this is a long trend. It's not anything new or recent, but this is going back thousands of years. So
that's a really great point that you bring up with that, because one of the goddesses that we see very prominent today across just the pagan board is Hecate. And we see her in Greece, we see her in Rome, but we also see her originating in Egypt. So you are very right that everyone kind of turned to Egypt, that kind of set that trend there, and they kind of delved in right there and then adapted a lot of that. So that does make sense in a way that maybe some people that are more drawn to Egyptian stuff today, it's not necessarily that they're veering off from their own heritage of that mythology so much as they're returning to its roots, maybe.
I mean, we have an obelisk as one of our national monuments.
Yeah,
There's an
right.
obelisk in London. But I wonder, and this is just like the gay part of me, there's also a glamour to Egypt as well, because through Hollywood, through the movies, you know, we think of all the palatial times of Egypt, and we don't realize the actual long history of Egypt and everything. And also, like, even the Jesus story, whether you believe it or not, you know, being kind of ripped apart in a certain way and then 3 days coming back. That comes from Egyptian mythology. But I think it's the glamour, too, that we like. We like shiny things, and you know, the Egypt culture to us is shiny and it's sexy.
I grew up with the Mummy too, which was just like the icon of just like glamour. And if you watched that and didn't become bisexual afterwards, I don't know what's wrong with you.
Well, and mine was Stargate. Stargate was
Stargate,
like,
yep.
and I think that started this whole conversation about ancient aliens.
Okay.
Which I know how you feel about that, Nick.
Gosh, I love all those memes right now with the Mummy where it's like, yeah, my sexual awakening, and it's just a picture of like Brendan Fraser. Accurate. So.
No, I know that you wanted to ask about curses too.
I do. I have one other question. So it's going back to just being influenced by like the Mummy or Indiana Jones. I think every little kid back in the day had a moment of wanting to be an archaeologist. I know I was one of them until I learned about Egyptian curses and people opening tombs and then everyone dying. And that became something where I was like, oh, never mind. Hard no. No, thank you. But going back to that, and I know that you have been involved in digs and have done things like that. I know that scientifically, you know, we've kind of deduced that a lot of this can be bacteria and different things like that. But we still have those where it's like the entire team suffers some kind of tragedy within like a year following, or things that aren't necessarily always health related. And my question actually is not just your view on that, but just in your own experiences, have you ever come across something where you and your team were like, something here might be kind of weird, or it was rumored to be cursed? And were there any experiences that you or any of your teammates had?
Yeah, no, another great question, and one that I often get asked by people as well. You know, I fortunately, personally, have not experienced any kind of what would be labeled as a curse or kind of a malicious kind of event after working in Egypt, fortunately. I think the closest I ever came to that was actually, it's a funny story. I was working in a tomb in the Valley of the Kings, and I was there all by myself. I was just on my own for the day, kind of working way down deep in the burial chamber. So, like, natural light couldn't even penetrate this far into the tomb. And the lights suddenly went off in the tomb because there was a power outage in the Valley of the Kings. And I mean, I lost it. I started freaking out. You know, suddenly, and I knew I was alone in the tomb, but suddenly in your head, you know, the mummy's crawling out.
Oh my gosh.
You know, it's just like, I don't think I've ever been more scared in my life. So, needless to say, quickly found my flashlight and then turned that on and was just like waving it around like, wait, who's here? Who's around? So that was pretty freaky. So that might be the closest I've ever been to any kind of Egyptian curse, perhaps. But yeah, I mean, we've always, you know, ever since like the discovery of King Tut's tomb in 1922, and even earlier than that, we've had this kind of fascination or obsession with Egyptian curses. And as far as the ancient Egyptian texts go, we don't have anything directly related to like a mummy's curse, right? In any of the tomb inscriptions that we have. The closest thing that I can think of off the top of my head that we do have, you know, papyrus scrolls. We do have little clay kind of figurines, almost like an Egyptian voodoo doll, if you will, that have little kind of like harmful wishes or perhaps curses, we could label them, written on these scrolls or these little clay figurines. And, you know, the ancient Egyptians, they were human just like us, right? And so you get mad at your neighbor, or you've got a relative that you're pissed off with, and you want to wish them ill, or in their case, they took it to the next level and they created like almost like a little voodoo doll to kind of, you know, put a curse on them. So these are really kind of fascinating objects that we do have from ancient Egypt. And you know, again, it shows that kind of relatability to the ancient Egyptians that we can have, you know, today. I have done lots of excavations in Egypt working with human remains in particular. I've excavated a number of cemeteries. I've studied ancient mummies before, human and animal. And again, fortunately, I've never myself experienced anything. I haven't heard anything from teammates, you know, in terms of, curses that were kind of executed after those excavations. But I do have to preface or say that, while working at those types of sites or working with those, human remains, I'm always super respectful. I always kind of think about and wonder, who was this person in life? I'm not just kind of tossing their bones around or whatever. So I try to treat them with respect, not only because they were once alive and human, but also just in case there might be a curse surrounding them. I don't want to small. So, but that's such a great question, and it's, really fun to kind of think over and wonder about. So
I have a question about ghosts. We have this whole region is so full of so many lives, and, the idea of goddesses and gods and spiritual beings. Derek, you're so in tune with that. But I don't hear a lot of ghost stories of the ghost of Cleopatra is running around. I hear zero ghost stories. And for such a land with such a history and with still so much to discover, you would think that it would be ripe with ghost stories. And I never hear any of them.
So when I went to Luxor for the very first time,
the hotel in
Vegas? Yes. So I went to Luxor, Vegas. It was awesome, you guys.
Honey, I saw plenty there.
I was drunk. But I was so excited to go to Luxor because of Luxor, Vegas, to be honest with you. I was like, oh, this is what it's modeled. It doesn't look the same. So I was in Luxor, and I actually experienced a lot of energy there. But what was really cool is I took these pictures there. And when the pictures came back, this is when it was physical, because this was, 9/11. I was in Egypt on 9/11 at the temple of Sobek. Yeah, in Komombo.
Jesus.
So I was actually at the temple when we got the first call that said one plane had hit. Wild, right? And I was by myself in Egypt on a little tour. So that happened at that time, but at the same space, we went to Luxor, took this picture, the film came back, and there were orbs throughout the entire picture, and I was blown away. And I was like, well, that could be reflections of dust or particles or
a lot of dust,
whatever coming off. But I took multiple pictures, and I'm like, and I compared them to other things, and I just can't explain those images that I had in the physical form. And I was like, there's something going on with that. And then at the same respect, when I was in Egypt in 2019, for just to touch on the curse thing, I noticed that a lot of people don't want to go into the King Tut tomb. So both times I went, people didn't pay the extra $5 to go into the King Tut tomb. And I thought that was so bizarre. And I was like, are people afraid that this idea of this curse is because if they believe it, then they could manifest something because they're believing those things. And I was like, I'm going in, pay that $5. And I went in there, and that was the most incredible experience. And we were in there alone. Matt and I were in there alone. My boyfriend was with me. And I was like, oh my God. And my body started vibrating. I can't explain what fully happened, but I was not shaking, vibrating. And so I was like, oh my God. I was like, the mummy, and then the little space, and the man was down there going oh yeah, let me show you over here. It's very small. It's a very small unit. But when we got out and I stood outside right where the little placard is, I was like, Matt, I'm vibrating. My body is vibrating. I'm not shaking. I'm vibrating. Something is happening here. And the weird thing is, right when I got back, this is just to go on your curse thing. When I got back, I was like, what's wrong with my dog? He literally died shortly after I had just gotten back. And my first thought was, oh my God, was there a curse? I was in the King Tut tomb. Nobody else wanted to go into it. And I was like, that's absolute bullshit. I had to talk myself down off of that one. I'm like, no, you're going to create that and that will be your reality. But that's not what's happening here. And I had to really rein it in for myself. But it's interesting that just after I would go into King Tut's tomb, that all of a sudden my angelic little beast would pass, So you kind of sit there going, what the fuck?
Right. I mean, I can't blame you for going there.
Oh,
go ahead,
I'm
sorry.
so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Not to, maybe convince you more perhaps, but, when Carter and Carnarvon, the two English guys who were excavating that tomb, were working in King Tut's tomb, Carter's pet canary was killed by a cobra. And then actually when Lord Carnarvon, he died within a year of the tomb being found. And the same night that he died in Cairo, his dog, all the way back in England, actually died pretty much at the same time as Lord Carnarvon. So
No,
Isn't
man.
that
I want to say
wild?
there's a connection.
Crazy.
There's
And it's,
something-
weird that it's these animals too, which is such a
Yeah.
big part of Egyptian life, where is animals.
Yeah, my little Anubis. He actually looked like Anubis too. Believe it or not, he was black. I mean, literally Anubis. So you know what though? I do believe, just from a spiritual background, I do believe that specific things that we do are part of our like rites of passage or gateways. I believe that me going to Egypt was a very big gateway for me. We were just a lot of really cool stuff happened on that trip, but it was a huge gateway. So it almost marked the passage, and it was time for him to leave so I could go into the next space. So I really divinely believe that everything is aligned for specific reasons that we create for ourselves. And I think that that's where a lot of the ancient Egyptian mysticism comes in. And, you know, we're talking about why do people believe in it so much? And you're talking to the person that's from past lives. And I take people into their past lives, and they right now in our time will bring forward specific memories of ancient Egypt. I can't tell you how many I have done that they'll bring up things that I'm like, how in the like are they pulling this information forward? And I'm finding that there is a past life connection here, regardless of belief systems. Even if they, let's say that's not a real thing, why are they picking up specific information from these visions and these experiences with Egypt that are helping them in this lifetime? There's something about ancient Egypt and the pathways, the lifestyle, the mysticism, the magic, the healing that is brought forward in this lifetime right now. And even if past lives are not real, doesn't it serve the purpose that healing is taking place and that transformation is happening? And so it's all stemming in Egypt.
Yeah. Have you actually, speaking on this topic, and sorry, not to derail our conversation, but have you heard of a figure named Seti in terms of spirituality and this kind of ancient connection to
Not
ancient Egypt?
Seti, but not Seti.
So she is this like fascinating figure in Egyptology where she, grew up in the early 1900s in England. And when she was about 4 years old, she actually had a fall down the stairs. And when she kind of came to after being a little, knocked out essentially from this fall, she kept telling her parents that she wanted to go home. She wanted to go home. And they were so confused. They were like, "You are home. What are you talking about?" And a couple weeks later, they took her to the British Museum. She went to go see the ancient Egypt galleries. And she finally exclaimed, like, "Oh my gosh, like I'm home. I finally fit in." And over the years, as she grew into an adult, she became fascinated with ancient Egypt and had this strong connection to like the land of Egypt. And essentially what happened was she ended up moving to Egypt. She lived at a place called Abydos. And she lived near a temple built by Seti I, who was the father of Ramses the Great. And she had kind of come to the conclusion or somehow figured out that in a past life, she was actually part of the harem of Seti I, and she was one of his wives. And, lots of people she would tell the story to, and they were kind of skeptics, and they'd say, "Oh, you're just making stuff up. You don't know what you're talking about." And the kind of crazy thing or the fascinating thing was she would go around this site at Abydos, and she would just point to blank spaces of sand and say, "Oh, yeah, if you dig here, you'll find a house, or you dig over there, you're going to find a tomb, or, here is like the temple courtyard." And sure enough, every time archaeologists dug where she told them to dig, they were finding exactly what she was saying was there. So either she really was from ancient Egypt and living kind of the second life, or she was just a really good archaeologist. But really a fascinating figure. So if you're interested in this whole, kind of experience of a past life in ancient Egypt, I would, any viewer or yourself, look up Seti. Really fascinating figure. So,
and I've heard that story. I just didn't have the name with that story, but I've heard this and I've heard the details, and it's chilling.
That's amazing.
And like you said, it was from like when she was little.
Yeah.
And it was just like she just knew. Like you just like know things. All right, Nick, we have to talk about ancient aliens. We have to. I'm obsessed with UFOs. I've talked about how I just stood outside when I was a kid and I was just like, beam me up, Scotty. And I know that this has become such a hot button with researchers like yourself that are mired in the actual facts of a beautiful empire and a beautiful civilization history. And Ancient Aliens has become so popular as a show. I remember the first season, everybody was like, what the hell is this? And now it's like, if you're cool, you watch Ancient Aliens. But now they're going off the rails and they're like, it's getting so ridiculous, and I still watch every single episode. But if you're, from your point of view, if you could kind of refute some of the myths that are out there regarding Ancient Aliens, because I know your personal views on it. There's the idea of the civilization was so advanced and so civilized, even to the tools that they were using, even to the fact that they were moving these rocks, and how were they doing that? And it seemed like this civilization from one night to the other, all of a sudden was an evolved people. And so there's the thought that there has to have been some influence to come in because it happened so rapidly. There was no lead up to this kind of advancement. Also, even the building of the pyramids, they think that extraterrestrials used acoustic stone levitation to get everything in place because it was so perfectly placed. That's just two of like the major tenements of this. There's other stuff, such as there's UFOs, helicopters, smartphones that you can see in hieroglyphics, which, take what you will.
Yeah.
But there's been like metals that have found that were not around at that time. So maybe you can talk about some of the myths that are out there that just drive you crazy because you know the truth.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, so I always start out these conversations with, it's a really interesting interpretation of the evidence. And I very much am a facts man. So I base my beliefs and my experiences on the facts and what I know. And being a specialist in the field of Egyptology, what I can say for certain is that we do, in fact, actually have texts and, archaeological evidence that lets us know that it was, in fact, the ancient Egyptians who were actually building these monuments. Not just the famous pyramids at the Giza Plateau, but, all these other kind of architectural marvels throughout the land of Egypt, right? Think of like Karnak Temple, the largest, religious site in the world. It's bigger than Vatican City. We've got the Valley of the Kings and the beautiful tombs down there. And all these other monuments that the Egyptians were able to build, thousands of years after the pyramids at Giza were built. And so I think, it's in some ways, Ancient Aliens, it might be a little bit unfair to the ancient Egyptians, kind of taking away that, kind of prestige or that honor that they deserve of, they were in fact great architects and engineers themselves. Some of the specific evidence I'm thinking of is we've got a papyrus from this place called Wadi Jarf, which is written on a scroll, and it talks about the delivery of limestone blocks to the Giza Plateau during the building of Khufu's pyramid, the largest pyramid at the Giza Plateau. We also have the village of the workmen that was discovered by an American team led by Mark Lehner close to the pyramids of Giza. This is where the men who were, conscripted to build these monuments were actually living and experiencing their daily lives while at the construction site. And there's been a number of, studies and kind of experimental archaeological kind of experiences, I guess, that have been done, to cut, let's say limestone blocks with more like primitive tools. How do you drag those across like the desert sands? I think there was a team from the Netherlands that actually was able to show that, with simple kind of wooden logs and water, you'd be able to drag these huge stones across the desert. And so, I bring all this up because we have the evidence that it could be done with what was available to the ancient Egyptians, which for me speaks to the fact that the Egyptians themselves would have been able to build these monuments as well. So usually everything that I hear when chatting with people about, what about this technology or, what about these dates not matching up? Usually archaeology has kind of a counterpoint or an explanation for that.
One of the bases for the last two Indiana Jones was there's depictions of people from Egyptian history with elongated skulls, and that kind of started this whole thing about aliens and things like that. And I know I have here one of the examples was the Temple of Hathor. There was like reptilian type people in charge. So where does that kind of come from in this? And could it have any possibility? Where did the elongated skulls come when we see depicted in future appearances of aliens?
Yeah, no, that's another great kind of point or issue to bring up. So in terms of the elongated skulls, the specific kind of art style that I am aware of or thinking of is it comes from a period of Egyptian history called the Amarna period. This essentially was a time when the country was undergoing this kind of social, religious, kind of political revolution, if you will. It was spearheaded by this king. His name was Akhenaten. And, as much as people loved this guy, Akhenaten, he was kind of a bit of a wackadoo. He just came up with these crazy concepts that were so foreign to what we would consider normal Egyptian art or religion or kind of practice at the time. And so one of these characteristics of his art style was, having these kind of elongated skulls, along with, men and women were often depicted with both kind of male and female attributes. It was almost kind of like a unisex type of art, if you will.
Non-binary.
And this all centered around, he had this religious cult centered on the sun disk, the Aten. And so the idea was that the Aten itself was kind of unisex, and so he therefore was trying to emulate that in his art. And some scholars have suggested that, this elongated skull, it wasn't, because of skull shaping like the Maya did. It wasn't because like aliens had taken over Egypt for, 20 years while this guy was ruling. But they think it might have something to do with, the way shadows are cast and the way human silhouettes look in the sunlight. And so perhaps that was the inspiration for kind of the art at that time, or at least depicting skulls that way. And then totally fair, I think, and valid to bring up, these different gods or goddesses that have like lizards for heads, or, even
or they come on a cloud of light, or they come from a flying vehicle.
Yeah. And, I think it's, again, kind of circling back to this idea of Egyptian religion and just how they really embraced the natural world, and they just really, kind of adapted, different creatures or parts of the earth that could represent these different gods or goddesses. And so I think that's probably more so what we're seeing in the artwork, more than, kind of lizard people crawling out from the earth and taking over, or, visits from extraterrestrials, perhaps. So,
well, it's funny because the guy you mentioned, and you pronounced his name better than I could, Akhenaten.
Yeah.
They say that after he died, kind of that advanced civilization almost dissipated so quickly, or it was suppressed, or it just kind of disappeared. Because we wonder, where did all this Egyptian advancement go? If they were so advanced, what stopped? It was like there was a pause button put, and we still don't understand a lot of what they did. And they say a lot of it disappeared when he died.
Yeah. No, I mean, his ideas and his kind of beliefs were so out there and so revolutionary that even for the ancient Egyptians, they were like, whoa, this is way too much. And so they put a stop to that. The ironic thing is they tried to erase his memory and his name from monuments. They destroyed his statues. We haven't even found his body, so potentially they robbed his tomb and destroyed his mummified remains.
Or he's in a UFO somewhere.
Yeah.
Like in Stargate.
Yes.
That's what you're talking about.
But it's a little odd that he was so out there, and that people went to great lengths to kind of get rid of what he was up to, and that there was this pause to the advancement of civilization at that point.
So there's something there.
It's just so crazy because he actually becomes kind of one of the most famous pharaohs from ancient Egypt, even though people tried to like forget him, and write him out of history essentially. So again, probably this fascination with these, interesting characters from the ancient world. So Yeah.
Well, Nicholas, it has been such an amazing pleasure to have you talk to us, especially during a transition in your life to your next moment. And we appreciate you so much for sharing your wisdom, your background, your experience, everything. Please tell everyone where they can find you, your website, anything that you have. Please tell us.
Yeah. No, thank you all so much for having me. It's really been a pleasure. If you're interested to kind of follow along my journey as an Egyptologist, I'd encourage you to follow my Instagram page. I think they've got the tag for that linked down below, but also it's just NB4326. So Nick Brown on Instagram. Follow there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you, Shauna. And thank you, Alexander, for this incredible day. My body feels tingly once again with all this information. So we thank you so much. And thank you to UBN Go and Club Paranormal for having us here today to discuss all things Egypt. And I feel like we're going to have more to talk about because we only started digging into the Akhenaten and alien stuff. So I feel like we're going to have a lot more to talk about in the future.
Oh, and go to our website, by the way. queerfromtheotherside.com, because you can write blog, you can message us, we can talk to you can talk to each other, all of our fans.
You can ask us questions.
Yep.
You can also give your own experiences if you've been to Egypt or you have any stories related to anything that we talked about today that you want to share. You can do it there. I'm especially interested in hearing any other Egyptian ghost stories that people may have, because now that you pointed it out, please drop on in and share that with us. And thank you so much. I have 9 million more questions for you now.
Part 2. After you're settled in your new digs, we'll have a follow-up.
Yeah, I'd love that. So that'd be great.
All right, everybody, stay tuned for future episodes from Queer from the Other Side. See you later.
That was another episode of Queer from the Other Side.
Please like, share, review, and subscribe.
Until next time, stay curious.